Direct response website marketing. Less is more as a business policy. 1. Why websites? If history can be reduced to the overriding principle, it'd be this. Every new technology changes society forever. The development of ironworking changed military and construction forever, enabling us to wage longer wars, to build taller buildings, and to develop tools to move beyond agriculture for the first time in history. The development of the printing press allowed ideas to be spread to the common man, pushing us toward democracy and putting a market value on ideas. And the development of corporate law allowed industries to develop to the point that ever higher levels of industrial development and research were possible, completely transforming the world in the space of about 150 years. Today, the new technology is the Internet. And in the 15-odd years that the Internet has been available to the masses, it's created nearly as many opportunities for promotion, communication, and business as all of the massive technological developments throughout history. In this book, we'll focus on one of the most profitable opportunities available to the prospective online businessman today, direct response website marketing. We'll talk about just what direct response site design is and how to design your web pages in order to convert as many visitors as possible into satisfied customers. We'll talk about the nuts and bolts of building a website, whether you want to do it yourself or whether you want to hire a professional coder to do it for you. We'll talk about what to include and what not to include on your website, and we'll give you the tools you need to write a sales letter for any product you choose to promote. And finally, and most importantly, we'll help you come up with some ideas to promote your website that'll bring in the traffic you need to make your business idea into a proven success. Sounds good? Then let's get started by talking a little bit more about your chosen medium, the Internet. A brief history of the Internet. Some of the revolutionary technologies we talked about at the start of this chapter, iron refining in particular, had their roots in military applications. It's a strange irony of human life, commented on by several philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche not the least among them, that war, the most destructive of human drives, is the one that most often requires people to stretch thin resources far enough in order to develop new, world-altering technologies. And the Internet is far from the least of these military success stories. The seeds of the Internet were first planted in America in the 1950s, during the height of the Cold War. In response to fears of Soviet domination of two critical technology races, the space race and the nuclear arms race, the United States government created ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, in order to develop countermeasures to the perceived Soviet threat. One of ARPA's first major successes was to develop rules of communication, the ancestors of today's network protocols, that allowed all of the United States radar systems to be linked together, which would enable them to communicate rapidly and retain infrastructure even in the event of unexpected nuclear attack. Fortunately, that nuclear attack never came, and equally as fortunately, the scientists at ARPA began to realize the non-military potential for the linking of vast computer systems. The first plans for ARPANET, the predecessor to the Internet, came about as part of an effort to make it easier for vital research-based computers to communicate with one another, allowing scientists to coordinate their research efforts across vast geographical distances. After some years of work defining some of the basic principles on which the Internet works, a discussion of which is well outside the scope of this book, ARPANET finally went live near the end of 1969 with 4 nodes active at 4 prominent universities. By 1971, the first emails could be sent across the network, and soon email was taking up some 75% of all network traffic. Some things never change. And by 1973, it was possible to send files from computer to computer through the FTP protocols that the Internet still uses today. Although computer processor speed, memory capacity, and general power advanced exponentially throughout the years, one of the most significant events in the development of the Internet came in 1978, when Western Union, the British Post Office, and a network company all came together to create the first truly international computer network. At around this time, the number of network nodes on ARPANET were growing into the hundreds, making the project far more ambitious than the initial plan to simply connect a handful of powerful research computers. But the greatest step in the Internet's development came in 1983, when the simpler ARPANET protocols for transferring information were supplanted by the TCP/IP protocol still used today, which transformed the ARPANET into what we recognize today as the Internet. The history of the commercial Internet. The basic idea of the Internet, allowing people to communicate and share ideas across vast geographical distances, was too good to keep away from the public for long, and in 1985 the government recognized this by opening ARPANET, now more properly known as the Internet, to commercial interests. Those commercial interests initially did little beyond allowing anyone who wanted to, rather than anyone with military clearance or academic credentials, to access the existing information networks that comprise the Internet. Companies like CompuServe and Prodigy offered anyone who was willing to pay for the privilege to use phone lines to dial up computers connected to the larger Internet, which would allow users at home to access the same database of information used by the academic computers, or at least a proprietary version of the same information. However, while computer technicians on ARPANET or computer enthusiasts on the long-running Telnet might have been willing to learn the sometimes arcane processes of accessing information on the Internet, the majority of potential users tended to view the Internet in the same way as a casual library user might view an encyclopedia. Nice to look at sometimes, but ultimately not worth the trouble of owning. That was largely changed by the efforts of the fledgling Netscape company, whose Mosaic web browser, one of the earliest versions of the once popular Netscape Navigator, made use of a new protocol for accessing information on the Internet, HTML. Before HTML, the process of sending information on the Internet was usually limited to sending large text files that required a separate program to open, or to using a proprietary form of encoding information, proprietary forms that usually skimped on things like presentation, graphics, or other features that we take for granted on the Internet today. HTML, by contrast, allowed nearly anyone with a basic knowledge of computer programming, or anyone who was willing to learn a few simple formatting instructions or tags, to create web pages that look nice, create images to illustrate product offers or scientific concepts, and to link people to other websites. If you're interested in learning more about HTML, stay tuned. In a later chapter, we'll discuss more about the ins and outs of HTML than you may have ever wanted to know about. And if you don't want to know about it at all, we'll discuss some ways to get your HTML coding done for you. The advent of HTML allowed the Internet to grow exponentially, and grow exponentially it did. By the mid-1990s, the Internet had moved beyond a few simple bulletin boards and academic research compendia. Now companies were starting to sell their products online. Artists were distributing their work in vastly populated forums. Even families were publishing their own web pages to announce family events to the world at large. The age of the Internet had truly arrived. So why the Internet? If you're reading this book at all, it's likely that you've already decided to use the Internet as a major distribution tool for your product, if not the exclusive distribution tool for your product. But for anyone who hasn't yet made that decision, or for anyone who wants to know just why the Internet is so ideal for business purposes, we'll talk briefly about why the Internet is a perfect vehicle for virtually any good or service you may want to sell. As of 2007, over 1 billion people worldwide use the Internet. However good the offline market for your product is, that's too large of a potential market to ignore. More than that, if you promote your product by traditional means, the number of people you can reach is limited by the amount of money you can spend and the number of media outlets you can reasonably contact, meaning most usually the media in your city alone. But by using the Internet, you can not only reach people around the world directly, but by making use of business referrals from satisfied online customers, you can reach people outside of your geographic range who'd never even think of using a computer. Additionally, traditional advertising only affords you a limited amount of space to talk about exactly what your product is and why people should buy it from you. But with the Internet, and specifically with direct response marketing, you have unlimited space to discuss your product in detail, give yourself and your business a distinct identity, and to convince people more effectively to buy your product. And finally, As we'll talk about in detail more in a later chapter, online business radically simplifies some of the major costs of running a business in the first place. If you want to start a traditional business, you'll need to apply for a license, you'll need to acquire a storefront or office space, and you'll need to devote huge amounts of time to the tedious process of filing tax documents, managing a payroll, and balancing your accounting books. With online commerce, you may still need the business license. Research business law in your area to find out if this is the case. But you're no longer required to find business premises beyond registering a domain and buying some web space. And with online payment services and software, most of your accounting takes care of itself. All you need to do is develop a great product or service, set up your basic website and payment options, write a killer sales letter, and watch your product start to sell itself. Sounds appealing? Then let's learn a little bit more about one of the most effective ways of promoting products in the modern internet age: direct response website marketing. 2. The basics of direct response. By putting your business on the internet, you stand to reach a much wider audience than you can through traditional channels. You're able to simplify your business operations considerably, and you have the opportunity to present more information about your product than you can through any other medium. But as good as all of that sounds, there's more to online business than simply putting your product out there and waiting for sales. As with any business, you're going to have to put some thought into how you plan to market your business. After all, there are millions of websites out there, and if you don't set your site apart from the rest, you stand a very real chance of vanishing into the crowd no matter how good your product or service is. And one of the best ways to promote your website online is through direct response website marketing. Why direct response? In order to understand what differentiates direct response from other commercial websites, it's helpful to think of the mass communications medium of yesterday, television. When most of us think of television programming, we tend to think of shows. Television shows have two distinctive features in common. They focus on providing content to an end user, the viewer. The quality of the content determines the quality of the show. They make their money by convincing other people to invest in the show. Neither of these points determines what the content of the show will be, or what exactly will make the investors, whatever form they take, give their money to the producers of the show. The show could be a drama, a comedy, a variety show, a reality show, a documentary, or any of 100 other categories. The investors might pay for advertising space on the show, buy tapes or DVDs of old episodes of the show, or even send money directly to the producers in response to solicitations, as with the pledge drives public television uses to raise funds. Whatever form the show or the revenue-building strategy takes, however, one key principle holds: content over marketing. If traditional web design can be thought of as shows, direct response website marketing can be thought of as infomercials. Infomercials have the following two features in common. They focus on describing a product to the end user. All content in the show is subordinated to the central goal of describing, promoting, and ultimately selling the product. The show makes its money through direct product sales. Again, neither of these points determines absolutely what form the infomercial will take. An infomercial might include a short dramatic sketch, a mock panel discussion, a comedy act, or simply a straightforward list of features and advantages for a given product. But as the first point states, all of these entertaining or informative pieces of content have to be subordinated to the central goal of selling products. A show's central point is essentially to get people to watch the show and to make their money based on the number of people who watch the show, whereas an infomercial's central point is ultimately to get people to stop watching the show and to start ordering the product. So again, why direct response? In traditional web design, the point is to sell the customer to the advertisers, or to sell the customers on your website and to make enough of an impression that they buy your product or otherwise subsidize the site. This can be more satisfying aesthetically, yes, but in order for a traditionally designed website to be successful, it needs to offer a wide variety of content from which users can freely choose. In simple terms, you need to offer your potential customers 20 things to do on your website, only one of which is buying your product. Ideally, that gives you a 5% chance to turn a visitor to your website into a sale. The basic idea behind direct response marketing is to give your potential customer just one thing to do on your website: buy the product. Ideally, this gives you a 100% conversion rate. Assuming that each type of website gets the same amount of traffic, and assuming that your goal here is to sell products rather than to entertain casual web surfers, direct response websites simply make more sense as a marketing tool. Staunch television fans might find the comparison between direct response marketing and infomercials troubling. After all, very few people turn on the television in order to watch an infomercial, and the ability to eliminate commercials and other televised advertising from shows is one of the central features used to market the successful TiVo product. But if you intend to run a successful online business, it's important to remember to think in these terms. You're no longer a consumer of products, you're a producer. In television terms, you're no longer watching shows for entertainment or even producing entertaining shows. You're producing commercials for a product, and the success of your business depends on how successfully you can convert viewers into customers. And infomercials, for all the disadvantages they have in terms of entertainment, are indefinitely more effective than shows when it comes to producing customers. Yet by no means does your own infomercial have to be devoid of art, entertainment, or other such content, a topic which we'll get into further in a later chapter. Basic principles of direct response. Just as a few fundamental principles differentiate shows from infomercials, there's a parallel set of principles that differentiate traditional websites from direct response sites. Traditional websites focus on the website itself. All money made from the website is based on outside advertising, donations to support the site, or sometimes selling products from the site. Direct response websites focus on selling a product. Most of the money made from the website should be directly related to product sales. And just as in the television world, the fundamental principles behind a type of program dictates to some extent the form the program will take, your goals for your website will determine what you can and can't do when marketing your product. More fundamental than even these principles, though, are the limitations of the medium itself. In the television world, all programs will have a few common elements. All programs will either be filmed with cameras or generated by computers. All viewers will tune into all programs by selecting a channel on a TV set, and all programs will be sensitive to time constraints imposed by the TV station's programming schedule. To highlight the difference in approach between these two forms of commerce, let's first look at some of the common elements among all types of website, whatever its purpose. All websites are based on HTML code, the analog of a camera or computer filmmaking program in the television world. All websites are accessed either through links from other websites or through a customer actually typing in the URL web address. Websites are not, as a rule, time-sensitive. A viewer can browse a website for as long as he or she wants before leaving or buying a product. We'll talk some more about how to use these common elements of all websites most effectively throughout the rest of the book. But for now, taking into account both these common elements and the fundamental principles that drive each form of web commerce, let's look at some of the specific differences between traditional web design and direct response marketing websites. Basic rule number 1. No external links. In traditional web design, your website benefits to some extent from the amount of links you offer. Viewers have more of an incentive to visit your site. This is the logic behind the successful portal websites that sometimes offer little beyond a very good and well-organized collection of links. In direct response web design, your website is actually harmed by offering viewers external links or any distractions from buying the product. Therefore, the first basic rule of direct response web design is this: no external links. Once your customers get to your website, they should only leave once they've bought your product or decided that it isn't for them. Basic rule number 2. Small user base, high conversion rate. Traditional web design's aim is to attract and retain a consistent user base. If a traditional website's hit count is high, the website is more attractive to potential advertisers, allowing the website to make money. But that high hit count carries with it a cost: bandwidth fees. Think of bandwidth fees as your electronic rent. The more users go to a website, the more data your web server is responsible for sending and receiving, which means a higher basic operating cost. In direct response web design, you also need a high hit count initially. What you don't want is a high hit count that keeps coming back for more without ever buying a product, unless you want your viewers to constantly return to your site in order to check for new products and offers. For some specific notes on what to do if this is your business model, see the next chapter. In order to accomplish this, make your website as simple as possible. Give your viewers some basic facts about the product, some information about how this product stands up against its competitors, a few positive testimonials or a photo or two, and then an ordering procedure. That way your viewers can read your information, think about whether they want to buy the product or not, and then either buy it or leave it, keeping your bandwidth costs down by keeping out people who won't be of value to your product sales. Basic rule number 3. KISS. To go back to the television metaphor for a moment, imagine that you're watching an infomercial for a new kitchen knife. You hear the expert testimony, you watch the knife do its work, and you find the price reasonable. You decide, based on all of this, to buy the knife. So you wait for the end of the infomercial in order to learn how to order this wonderful knife, and you're told to dial a certain 1-800 number, to navigate a complicated menu, to enter a 12-digit confirmation code from the infomercial along with a social security number, and finally to talk to a sales representative about shipping information and payment. By the time you've gone through all of this and are about to read off your credit card numbers, a thought strikes you. Was one knife really worth all this trouble? This is exactly what you don't want your customers to think at any point while they're using your website. If your website is built on flashy but hard-to-use menus, if your ordering information is buried under a maze of links and supplementary pages full of product details, and if your ordering procedure is complicated and full of bugs, your customers are going to be too frustrated with your website to order your product, and worse, they might start to think of your products and your business as equally customer unfriendly. Computer scientists have an acronym to combat this possible problem: KISS, or Keep It Simple Stupid. If your website is easy to navigate, if the information about your product is clearly presented on as few pages as possible, and if your ordering procedure is bug-free, then viewers won't be scared off by your website, which leads to a much higher conversion rate, and thus a successful direct response marketing strategy. We've talked about what direct response website marketing is, why it's an excellent strategy for your business, and above all, a few basic principles of its implementation. And if you like what you've heard so far, then you've got everything you need to start thinking in practical terms at last, and it's time to start designing your direct response website, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. 3. Direct response site design. So we've talked about the internet in general, and we've talked about some of the key rules of direct response site design to keep in mind when you're actually building and publishing your website. As a reminder, here are those rules again. No external links. A small user base and a high conversion rate. Keep it simple, stupid. If you have your product ready and a good amount of marketing material related to it, then it's finally time to start building your direct response site, and it won't be long before you'll start raking in the profits. The first step: sitemap and design. To return to our tried and true television metaphor, imagine this. You're a young producer for NBC and you've been given the task of creating a new half-hour drama program for prime time. You're alone in your office, all set to make your first crucial notes that will become the finished program. So before you even think of some basic structural components, what's the concept behind the show? What characters will I feature? How will I fill 30 minutes every week and keep viewers coming back? You take out a blank piece of paper and start doodling costume designs for your Christmas special. You create a great design, throw some story and characters around it, and start filming your first episode. On the appointed day, the viewers tune in, hang around for 2 minutes, and then tune out. Your costume designs are just great as you intended, yes, but by choosing the wrong starting point, you weren't able to control every aspect of the viewer's experience of your show, and they responded by leaving your network, never to return. This kind of approach is problematic for any kind of creative work, but with enough work put into a project from any starting point, you can achieve some success. But when you're talking about a programming project, and all websites are essentially programming projects, choosing the wrong starting point is disastrous. If you start work on your website by firing up an HTML editor and blindly laying out pages, you'll be rewarded with an inconsistent, buggy, and hard-to-use website, which violates one of our most important rules for site design. In order to follow those rules and thus achieve success with your online business, start at the right place by creating a workable sitemap. A sitemap is just what it sounds like, a diagram showing exactly what content your website has and how that content connects to other content through hyperlinks. In order to understand how to build one, let's look at the simplest possible example of a sitemap, the classic Hello World program used by beginning programmers worldwide. Hello World programs consist of a single screen with a single message, Hello World. The sitemap for this would be a single page with a single piece of content on it saying exactly this. A more complicated sitemap might involve creating two pages, a Hello World index page followed by a page with other information. The sitemap for this would be the same single page with Hello World and a link to the next page followed by another page with other content. A mark should be made somewhere designating the Hello World page as the usual entry point to this bare-bones website. You don't need any technology fancier than a pen and paper to make a sitemap. Just draw out the pages you want and determine and note what should go on each page, including text, images, links, and tools for ordering your product. And connect the pages with lines to show how your viewers will navigate your site. If you want to get fancier with your design, there are also cheap or even free programs for mapping out websites before you actually build the pages. If you're doing your own coding, look into this option. Some of the most popular web authoring clients integrate site mapping functions into their page editing software, which can save you money and reduce the amount of time it takes to learn how to use a new piece of software. Site mapping may seem like an unnecessary step in the design process, especially with the fairly simple sites that direct response marketing demands. But without a fully detailed sitemap, you run the risk of increasing your costs beyond your original budget when you find out that the page you've designed doesn't work properly, or that you need some additional content or images but aren't sure where to put it. At best, this leads to costly revisions in terms of time if you're doing your own coding, and in terms of money if you're hiring a coder, and at worst, it can mean paying for a complete overhaul of your website. Think of your sitemap as your business plan. Write it first, then stick to it unless you have a very good reason to change it once the site goes live.